what's your perspective, right? As as you said, there's a growing number of data sources and more insights, shape up as you're enriching more the data. Isn't it really hard to define the static schema that we used to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Static schema, but let me actually because it's a good conversation, I'll start with the other extreme.
Okay.
Right? Because I think, the schema discussion usually goes from either
Black to white.
Yeah, exactly. It's like either everything is fixed or nothing is fixed, right? So, as you mentioned earlier, I was when I was at Symantec, one of the businesses, product groups that I ran was data loss prevention, the DLP business. And there is no schema, right? It's basically, how do you unstructured data, especially over email, right? That somebody might be sending social security numbers, or et cetera, et cetera. And what do you do there in those cases? I mean, DLP became a very successful category by just having essentially regular expressions, right? That you look for certain data. But has that been enough? Clearly not, right? Because you look at what's going on in the world of breaches, et cetera. If that technology, it's necessary, but not sufficient. So that's what shaped our worldview, is to say, look, that you don't want to insist on schema everywhere, right? There will be many, many types of data where you can do perfectly good processing without schema. But that is not sufficient by itself, right?
Okay.
Even in the world of security that we've been talking about now, like we just talked about, you need to understand metadata, you need to understand what is valuable data, and you can then combine it with other schema-less. You might, for example, have SharePoint documents where you will never get any schema, but they still contain valuable information. In order to protect it and process it, you need to be able to do it in a manner that doesn't depend on schema. So we don't have a kind of a religious view, if you will. I believe that it's actually a spectrum, and depending on what you're doing, and depending on how accurate it needs to be, right? And for many purposes, it may be that if you have heuristic methods that can work with schema-less data, you can still derive valuable uses and insights. But there may be other ones, like for example, if you're doing a banking transaction, that is absolutely unacceptable. If you are doing a search for close enough data sets that you're just looking for some human-assisted activity, that may be perfectly acceptable. So that's kind of how we view it. Is like, can we understand the use case and map it to that?
The way we see the world is really the schema and read perspective, right? Where the challenges that we observe with our customers is really that their environment is changing so quick that the traditional, pick your favorite, Oracle, DB2, Teradata, locked in static schema approach doesn't work anymore.
Correct.
I couldn't agree more with you that, especially in banking or, pick your favorite area, you need a schema, right? But the idea for us is that we kind of virtualize the schema. And I believe data is always at motion. So you basically say, okay, here's my data generating sources, and the data is flowing, and eventually here I have to kind of create, maybe a loan risk number. And how do I get from here with now all those different data sources, as you said, maybe structured, maybe unstructured, maybe time series data to here. The idea we really implement in our products, so we say, well, Hadoop is Moore's law on steroids, right? Because you have as many numbers in the cluster as machines in the cluster as you want, right? So why would we pre-optimize? Why do we create indices? Those kind of things. And of course, we still do under the hood.
Right.
But we cut out that slow, human-driven, IT-driven process where you spend months and months and months trying to model the perfect schema. And rather say, okay, well, this is the schema you need. So we kind of create this as a view on the data. And the cool thing is that you can create as many views on the data as you want, right? Cleaning the data as a view, aggregating as a view on the cleaning view, and then whatever, your predictions are just another view on that view, on that view. So if you decide, actually I missed kind of a data row here, you just adjust it down here and it flows all the way through because everything is a lens on the lens on the lens.
That's right.
So
that makes a lot of sense. And by the way, actually I don't know if it's surprising because, we've been in the world of ETL for a long time. It's very interesting that how, even in such a sort of, if you will, a traditional world, these concepts are absolutely making their way. I mean, I'll give you an example. In our next version of our product, we're introducing something called as a dynamic mapping. And mapping is, you know, a mapping.
Same concept.
So source, target. But you have, and processing in between. A lot of customers are like, hey, look, we use a lot of that for things like application consolidation. I'm simplifying my application architecture. I'm moving data from 5 different source systems to I don't want to recode that mapping 5 different times. Or it may actually be, I don't want to recode it for every table in those data. So can you introduce the concept, and it's probably the most popular concept. But so I think your point is well taken, that a purely static schema, I think, has only limited use. I think the flexibility is critical.
What we're observing in the market is certainly that time is becoming the biggest obstacle for everything, right? So everything needs to be more agile, faster turnaround times, right? Because the perception of IT, it's a cost center.
Correct.
Right? And the reason it costs is because the people and their time, right? So productivity gains, even if you heavily have to pay in maybe CPU, that's now so incredible cheap, it's not a problem anymore, right? And I think that's what happened in the last couple of decades, is it shifted around, right? Compute is so cheap now that we can just, throw it after every problem, where human beings, became way more expensive, than the hardware. What I'm actually pretty happy about. But so we're really focusing on how simple can we make the creation of the schema on read approach, right? Because yes, you have diverse data sets, and you somehow have to bring it together just to make a line chart. You have to have an X and a Y, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly right. I think our view is we have Informatica. Obviously, we pride ourselves on the developer community we have. Meaning we have over 100,000 developers worldwide who use Informatica tools. I mean, that's their primary tool that they use. And from that perspective, what we have recognized is these technologies are very useful to enhance their productivity. It makes them so. Ultimately, the technology doesn't have to provide the perfect answer. If it gets close enough, it can save the developer a lot of time, right? So that's completely agree with that point.